The Locust. Congratulations, you did it. You begged enough to get me to do something, and by begged, I mean got really lucky, since I was already planning on doing an episode on this mech and had everything ready to go. I was just gonna do a different video before this, and the people asking for it on Discord managed to get lucky, so I moved it up. Also, since my new PC is arriving, right now, probably, when you see this, I figured I would readjust my schedule a bit so I could get something short and sweet out while I get everything reinstalled, transferred, and set up. So, the Locust. A wonderful, terrific, excellent execution method for mech warriors that you really don't like. A mech with no plan B, and so little protection that you have no option but to raw dog every battle you're in and pray you can pull out before things get too hot. Otherwise, the consequences, oh, they're far worse than 18 years of child support. This mech is the live fast, die quickly, leave an unidentifiable corpse meme machine of a battle mech. While the Irby is a trash can that struggles to move faster than walking pace, the Locust is practically made of speed. So today, I'm going to be talking about it. From its history, to its armament and performance, to the reputation that Locust pilots have garnered, and why it's entirely justified. Before we get into things though, introductions. Generic greetings and welcome to Science Insanity, a channel dedicated to bringing my love of sci-fi to you and being entertaining while doing it, hopefully. If I succeed, professional idiot that I am, then I hope I can earn that subscribe by the end of the video. And with that, the Locust. So, anyone who knows Battletech and really understands what the Locust is already knows exactly why I described it like I did at the beginning. And to everyone else, you might be able to make some deductions using context clues. It looks small, it runs fast, it has no major weapons on it, so it's a scout or something, right? No, wrong, incorrect. It's the ultimate skill check. The Locust is a running adrenaline machine, as it's got so little protection that any firm hit from, well, just about anything will start ripping chunks off the mech, if not outright kill it. God forbid you get hit in the legs and topple face first into the dirt at over 100 kph. So while most mech warriors quickly learn to despise the Locust, there is a very small and very insane subset of mech warrior populations that fall in love with it, since it is the most nah, I'd win mech that the setting has on offer. It's made of paper and dreams, but its speed and mobility let it literally weave through autocannon fire, dodge homing missiles, and dart in and out of cover so fast that even lasers can barely scratch it. A world-class mech warrior in a Locust can run circles around even far more potent machines. It's also unimaginably dirt cheap, like actually cheaper than the dirt it walks on, and since it's so mediocre, it's one of the only mechs in the setting that not only hasn't had its factories blown up, but actually had more built to meet demand. And as for the scouting thing, you'd think that it would be used for scouting. But again, while it was intended for scouting as one of its main roles, it has almost no equipment to do it and is not really set up for it. Something like Krupp Armament Works Ostscout, that was designed for recon, using a massive sensor suite that ate up most of the chassis' available weight, able to clear sensor distortions like smoke, metallic debris, and errant EM signatures to clearly see enemy vehicles, got enough speed to escape, low profile, all that. Yeah, the Locust, no, it was built with the scouting philosophy of, if I'm so fast even I don't know where the hell I'm going, then the enemy can't stop me either. It was meant to YOLO forwards, find the enemy, engage the enemy for all of 2 seconds before neuron activation reminded the pilot that he was about to die, and then run away as fast as possible with the newfound knowledge of where the enemy was and how many of them there were, assuming the Locust pilot survived to get back to friendly lines, that is. It was also meant to engage in hit and run strategies as well as what I can only call the Leroy maneuver. Part of the Locust's mobility was meant to allow it to find a gap in enemy lines and rush through before anyone could react. And once it was through, the only thing capable of catching it was aerospace fighters and bombers, so it presented a very difficult but very effective raiding target. You could essentially take this thing behind the lines and go for a joyride because nothing could stop you. If you find command bunkers, ammo depots, supply sites, anything and everything of military value, just blow them up and run on. It's not like anything can catch you and stop you. It was also so fast that it would cause chaos just by moving around, because the report of locusts behind enemy lines in one area would be quite literally objectively wrong 10 or 20 minutes later because they would already have moved on to a different, equally vital location, which gave the impression that there was a hell of a lot more of them than there were. Even in this Goldilocks zone though, where everything went perfect for the Locust, it was pretty trash, since the default loadouts, of which wouldn't really be upgraded for hundreds of years, had some piddly machine guns and one medium-class laser, and that was pretty much the flat standard for its firepower across most of its life. Now, again, since it was so cheap, none of these downsides or tactical flaws were much of an issue for it, since they tended to be everywhere in massive numbers, from pirates to mercs to planetary defense forces to even the Great House militaries. Anywhere that there was one locust, just like the actual insect, there was probably millions more that you just couldn't see on the other side of a hill. It's very much a quantity over quality mech, where employing a dozen locusts to run around being annoying little shits is both a valid use of resources and cost-effective if the enemy falls for it, since trying to focus on the 20-ton shitbox running around your feet means you're an easy target for heavy mechs lining up a Gauss slug with your cockpit. Marauder says hello, and goodbye. So that's generally what the Locust is. Uber fast, incredibly flimsy, underarmed, and reliant on speed as their defense. First designed and built by Bergen Industries at the turn of the century, the Locust's first early models walked off the assembly lines in 2499, just at the turn of the century. Full-scale production kicked off a few months later, and the first major orders began to be filled in the early 2500s. In many ways, the Locust was a distinctly average mech. When compared against any of the other specialist scouts, skirmishers, or rapid response light mechs that the Star League and Great Houses fielded, it was generally unimpressive. But what gave the Locust such early success was the political and economic situation of the time. The Great Houses were at each other's throats and eager to get their hands on any combat vehicles they could during the Age of War. The formation of the Star League was only 70 years away, and with the coming Unification War immediately after, the demand for materiel was at an all-time high for the first 100-150 years of this mech's life. The reality of combat also helped the Locust, as many worlds could make use of a light, cheap mech to police their populations. Most uprisings and rebellions were on relatively small scale across the Inner Sphere and could be cowed by the machine guns and single laser on the Locust without needing to invest a lot into resources and garrisons. And with how cheap it was, they could be purchased in bulk by anyone who might have needed the metal. Over the coming years, the Locust also found itself as one of the few mechs able to slip past the Star League's mandates. As it rose to power, the Star League tried to monopolize as much violence as it could, restricting the Great Houses in size and power of the war gear that they could actually get and how much of it they could get. The Locust, though, was already under the SLDF's notice, so it could be purchased in bulk with no issue or suspicion. It generally wasn't viewed seriously by the League. When the Star League Civil War happened and the following succession wars decimated the Inner Sphere, the Locust's relative unimpressiveness saved it again. It was generally viewed as such a small threat that when raids and attacks were launched, their factories and production lines were generally never targeted. Blowing up the single factory that made king crabs? Oh yeah, destroy that sucker. You don't want anyone to have that. Better to just wipe it away. The factories that were making atlases? Gone. Something like the Locust, literally not worth the time, effort, or losses you would incur trying to invade or raid the world that they were on. In fact, it was so untouched and ignored that over the succession wars, the number of factories making the Locust actually increased. An incredible thing to happen, by the way, since overall the industry, technology, and logistics of the Inner Sphere was absolutely wrecked during the conflicts. So the fact that the Locust not only survived, but actually had more factories built is nothing short of a miracle. And honestly, by this point in the setting, this mech absolutely lived up to its name, just flooding in massive numbers everywhere. And honestly, as much as I wish I could regale you with an interesting history of the Locust and its development over the years, I can't, because it didn't really have one. A Locust that you could buy in 2500 was most likely identical to one you could buy 600 years later in 3100. Its role and use pretty much remains static all the way until the current year in Battletech's history and is still unreplaced. Now, generally, the Great Houses and the clans and stuff have moved on to different light mechs, but the Locust still exists in huge numbers out in the periphery and in the garrisons and second-line units of all of the factions that exist. There was plenty of attempts, however, to make upgraded or modernized versions, but they were never really produced in large numbers. If anything, I would describe the Locust as the Battletech version of the real-world BMP-1. Cheap, simple, kinda shit, but easy to produce in ungodly numbers, and useful for a few important but niche combat roles. There were upgrades, sure, but they were far fewer in number and way more expensive, ruining the allure of the vehicle in the first place. So let's move on to its statistics, shall we? The Locust is fast, ungodly fast, as I've said. Mounting an LTV manufactured 160 rating in the base model, the Locust dedicated most of its available weight to the power plant, letting the mech scream across the battlefield at 130 kilometers per hour. This meant that for many years, the Locust was the fastest mech in the setting. As I've said though, the Locust dedicates so much tonnage to its power plant that there's almost nothing left over for, well, anything else. For its armament, the Locust comes with 2 Sperry Browning machine guns, one in each plate-like arm. These arms were able to rotate 360 degrees since they had no actuators beyond the side torso mounting. While this meant that the Locust lost all potential utility of having arms, it did mean that it could rotate to fire behind the mech similar to something like the Rifleman, allowing the Locust to run away as fast as possible while the pilot felt like they had the ability to shoot back. Making up pretty much all of the Locust's actual punching power, though, was a single Martel medium laser mounted in the center torso just below the cockpit and in front of the reactor. While this gave the Locust the theoretical ability to handle heavy armor or other mechs, once again, it's more of a placebo than anything else. The Locust's armament was generally very good at dealing with infantry and light/unarmored vehicles, hovercrafts, trucks, transport vehicles, APCs, that kind of thing. But the lack of any serious hitting power and only one medium laser meant that against pretty much anything else that could fight back or that did have decent amounts of armor, the Locust was woefully incapable of actually doing anything. However, because of this light armament, the 10 heatsinks that it carried meant that the Locust was pretty much always heat neutral, even in very warm environments. So good, great upside. That's one thing you basically never have to worry about. But the real problem comes in with the armor. Now, this was... How do I even go over this? So a lot of light mechs have very poor armor. The Locust doesn't have the worst armor of every light mech. There are plenty that were never supposed to see combat or were only meant to fight infantry that have a lot worse armor, but compared to all the other light mechs that are actually supposed to be doing fighting, it's awful. It's unbelievably awful. It's terrible. Only 4 measly tons to cover the entire mech. And I want to point out, if you look at images of the Locust, you might notice that the armor looks like someone just took steel sheets or tinfoil and formed it to the mech's components. And that's because they basically did. The armor is so thin that Locusts often don't even get to use it. The normally ablative property of battle mech's armor that just peels off and melts away instead of dealing tons of damage or outright absorbing the projectile doesn't really work for the Locust since there's so little of it. If it eats shots from almost any autocannon, the Locust is boned. The armor won't do anything. If it gets hit by any significant energy weapons, it's slag. The armor is not going to be able to stop the laser before it immediately starts melting into the internals. Hell, a lucky shot into the hip joints by as little as a single medium laser can and has ripped the legs right off of this thing in lore. Really, the armor is only good for protecting against machine gun rounds, small lasers, a random LRM here or there, or ineffective extreme range shots. Besides, if you're eating shots, it's because you're not going fast enough. And if you're not going fast enough, you're doing the Locust wrong. And if you're doing the Locust wrong, you're going to die very quickly. Now, let's talk about some of the variants this mech has, since some are really funny, some are trash, most are trash, and some are absolutely hilarious. Starting with my personal favorite meme version, the 1L, the first attempt to actually increase the speed of this mech. Fielding triple strength Myanmar, the 1L could rip across the battlefield at a monstrous 200 kilometers per hour, or just under, as TSM increases the run speed by about 50% for short periods of time. The funny part is that it took until 3030 for this to work. Earlier attempts using primitive or ramshot replicas of Star League TSM had a nasty tendency to light the legs of the Locust on fire because the actual Myanmar began to chemically combust. Not regular fire, mind you, a chemical flame as metal started burning. Oh joy. If I just run fast enough, I can outrun the flames. Don't look down, you're fine. Up next is arguably the single worst Locust variant ever, a perfect example of FedSun engineers doing everything wrong. If it doesn't have an autocannon, the FedSuns just have no idea what it's supposed to do or what to do with it. The 1M. This version of the Locust tries to swap it more towards a fire support mech, replacing the machine guns with 2 LRM-5s and 1 ton of reloads, so equivalent of an LRM-10 and 1 medium laser. And this seems like a good idea until you notice that the 1M sacrifices 3 tons of armor to make this work. 3 tons! Of the Locust's 4 tons of armor. 75% of the armor. I swear to God, an infantryman with a bayonet could take this version down if he got close enough. Just slap the legs and the whole thing will come apart. Who thought that this was a good idea? The FedSuns also had another failed variant that stripped like everything off the mech to try and add a particle cannon. It didn't work, obviously, but, you know, classic FedSuns. Another, great, I guess, example of the Locust engineering is the 1v2, a periphery design. Oh boy. What's to say other than replace the weapons with rocket launchers? You might ask, what's a rocket launcher? Is it like an SRM or an LRM? And yes, you'd be correct. Rocket launchers are actually some of the most powerful missile weapons in Battletech. They punch incredibly hard, move incredibly fast in their projectile speed, and have the most varied and powerful payloads available. At the cost of only having 1 shot. Fire and forget doing anything else since you need to run back for more. And I guess giving the Locust a bunch of rocket launchers makes it more dangerous. Like, it can actually threaten larger mechs now, but you better hope it hits, because if it doesn't, it has no backup plan besides die horribly. Like, you don't even have any weapons to back you up at that point. And for some good ones, it's really only 2. Firstly, the Royal Star League variant, the 1VB. Using an XL engine, ferrofibrous armor, and an endosteel chassis, the Royal Locust has the tonnage to not only carry more armor while running at the same speed, but also to mount 2 medium pulse lasers, 2 small pulse lasers, and retain the regular medium laser in the center torso. This is just a lot of firepower. Like, this is a frankly silly amount of firepower for a 20-ton light mech to have. This version could probably hold its own against significantly bigger machines up to twice its weight capacity with this loadout. The other variant I really like is the 3M, a Free Worlds League design that is just all around great for a light mech of its size. It had an endosteel chassis and ferrofibrous armor, but no XL engine, so it didn't have the issue of being destroyed if a side torso got nuked. For its weapons, it carried 4 small lasers and the medium laser in the torso. This is a decent weapons load, good against infantry, light vehicles, and a decent threat to bigger machines in a support role if they're busy fighting something else that's scarier. But it also, adding on to its utility, had an anti-missile system bolted onto the shoulder, and this gives it a lot of flexibility. This is probably the best version of the Locust as a force multiplier. It can protect larger mechs, quickly flank enemies with a respectable loadout, deals great with infantry in urban environments because of all of its small weapons, and generally it's just a good secondary role battle mech to force multiply your units, protecting them, dealing with their flanks and stuff. Like, it's just all around amazing. And then we have the king of stupid, the 6M. What the actual fuck are you people doing? Strip everything but like 2 small lasers off of it and then go all in on speed. What's the point of this? Are you trying to take flight exclusively using the ground force phenomena? What is this? A 280 rating extra large engine and mask? This thing runs at 230 kph normally, and with the mask, it can hit 310! What the fuck is the point of this? Why? Why would you ever need 310 kilometers worth of speed? Are you trying to outrun a laser? Are you trying to dodge child support? Are you attempting to catch up with your glory days because you peaked in high school? Why would you ever need this? By the way, to all my American viewers, that's almost 200 miles per hour. Could you fucking imagine this thing sprinting past you like you're standing still on the highway? You're doing 100, and this thing absolutely flies past you like you're standing still. The default 130 is already more than fast enough. Why do you need 310? What are you running from? And that brings me to the last part, the insane adrenaline junkies that pilot these things. Because here's the deal. Most people despise the locust. Ask 99% of mech warriors and they'll tell you it's a death trap only suitable for scouting and getting recruits you don't like killed. Ask a mech tech and they'll tell you that it's an absolute nightmare because even the most basic of stress and damage can do severe harm to this mech and cause an absolute hell of maintenance and repair work that needs to be done to make sure it's still functioning. The general opinion is that it's a veritable pilot murdering machine. If you ask a Fed son, they'll tell you that when piloted by Capellans, the Locust also makes for really good target practice. But here's the thing. For that mentally unstable percent of people that sit in the Locust and feel no fear, deciding in fact that, hey, this is pretty good, this thing puts cocaine to shame. Because rarely, very rarely, everything just seems to work out. An adrenaline junkie, a gnaw-eyed-win connoisseur, a speed freak gets behind the controls, and it's like the hand of God is guiding that little mech as it does the impossible. Physics be damned, I'm going to outrun these lasers, parry these missiles, and return to sender these autocannon rounds. From my experience on tabletop, people love the Locust because it's a cheap, expendable little scout that occasionally evasion tanks way more damage than it has any right to. From a more in-universe perspective, it's the exact same thing. The people who enjoy the Locust are most likely experienced that kind of hallelujah moment, using the insane speed to basically ignore most battlefield issues. Flying by the seat of their pants, Locust pilots, the good ones that love the mech, can do almost anything. Need it to YOLO behind enemy lines and blow up an ammo depot? That Locust pilot is going to literally skip across the treetops all the way there like a cruise missile and blow it up. They probably won't be coming back, but I mean, hey, good job. Need it to run scouting on enemy force compositions? No problem, it'll just run right at the enemy lines and count up all the things shooting and missing at it. There you go, High Command, Lyran-style scouting without needing an assault mech to do it. And that's pretty much the entirety of the Locust. The pilots and the people that use it are some of the most insane, if not brain-damaged mech warriors out there. It's extremely fragile and has a number of glaring issues. It relies entirely on its speed because its weapons loadouts are usually pretty god-awful. But everything is made up for by how unbelievably cheap and numerous they are. If you're a mech warrior of literally any persuasion, whether it be pirate, mercenary, professional, or more, the Locust will always be there. It will always be dirt cheap, and for those aspiring to get into one of those three businesses, needing to get their own battle mech, it's probably one of the cheapest and easiest vehicles to get your hands on. And since it's so unbelievably ubiquitous, even for mech techs needing to do constant maintenance on this thing to stop its legs from falling apart, its parts are dirt cheap and so readily available, you're basically falling over them more frequently than air you breathe. And that concludes the video on the Locust. I have not much else to say, not much else to go over. It's a simple mech that fills a simple role, and it's very silly. And if you've made it this far in the video, you are clearly the target audience, so why not leave a like, subscribe, comment down below, do all of that good YouTube stuff to help the channel out. I'm trying to reach 40,000, which is like another 6,000 subs away by the time October rolls around, so I can do a 40k special and hit October strong. That's the goal. Or if you're feeling more generous, we do have a Patreon where you can throw a few dollars at Sci's Staying Alive Fund. Helps in the background and makes making content easier. Or if you just want to hang out and shoot the shit, we got a Discord where you can meet other fellow turbo nerds, share your interests and hobbies, and generally just hang around with like-minded people. I also stream on the weekends, most weekends, probably not this weekend though, because I'm getting my new PC and things are going to be really weird with scheduling. But most weekends I do stream science fiction stuff mech adjacent. And to all the people already supporting the channel, a huge thanks to the arms dealers supplying all of the Locusts you saw in today's video. I nearly tripped several times, and every time I did, my heart jumped into my throat as I thought I was about to faceplant into the dirt. The food merchants, making sure that starvation is an ever far away threat that never needs to be faced. And the coffee vendors, fueling my war on sleep. One day I shall never sleep again. I barely slept last night. The battle goes well. Thank you all very much for your support. I greatly appreciate it. And with that, the video is pretty much over. I hope you have a wonderful day. Outros are hard. Goodbye!